Now, on to the grand finale of today's event, the industry panel moderated by our very own Farzin Shadpour. Farzin is an aviation industry veteran, having worked at the Boeing company for 7 years. He quickly rose through the ranks, designing supply chains for planes such as the 737 MAX, 777X, and 787-10, helping Boeing save millions through efficiency gains in the process and being responsible for timing decisions for resources in excess of $5 billion. Farzin has been working in Silicon Valley for 8 years and is the Vice President and Managing Director of Plug and Play Supply Chain. Farzin, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Frederic and the team, and thank you to all the startups and our keynote speakers for sharing what they have done heroically in this unprecedented time, converting those 767s to freighters in 9 days. That sounds really amazing. And last but not least, I will be joined by 3 folks during this panel, and I hope that we will be able to have some more engaging conversations. We will be having Brian Cobb, Chief Innovation Officer at Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport, Thomas Rohrmeier, Director at Lufthansa Cargo, and David Merrill, CEO and co-founder of Elroy Air. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Doing well, Farzin.
Doing great.
Very good. Excellent.
Great.
Excellent, excellent. So let's jump in. I thought that I would start with you, Brian. How are you doing today?
Doing quite well, thank you.
Very
How
good.
are you?
Excellent. I like the background.
Thanks.
Yes.
All about brand.
And I like the mention of SFO to the right of your head. It reminds me where I am.
We're thinking of you.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. So I thought we would start by talking about how have things changed for you in the past few months, and how are you adapting to the new normal?
Yeah, it's just changed a very small amount, right? So yeah, just like anyone else, especially those that have joined earlier this morning, dramatic changes, frankly. We actually started to see changes around the January-February timeframe, and that was a result of soft cargo. If you're not familiar with CVG, we have Amazon Prime Air. This is their first global air hub. We also have DHL. This is their second largest hub in the world, all located here. So very fortunate from that perspective. We also have FedEx as a partner too. So as we were seeing, unfortunately, COVID hit the Asia Pacific markets, the cargo capabilities really softened quickly. Oddly enough, as that wave was coming across the world and hit the US from the passenger side of the house, actually cargo started to come back. So just as Dan had mentioned earlier in the fireside chat, absolutely e-commerce. If there's a shining star in all of this COVID-19, it's absolutely e-commerce and all things that our cargo carriers are doing, and subsequently passenger carriers trying to adjust to that new normalcy as well. For us, absolutely the impact on the passenger side has been rather dramatic. A typical day would have been about 15,000. Our low point was about 330 people through the checkpoint. So very, very shocking for all of us, both culturally, morally, and just as an aviation love interest. Wow, who could have ever thought? So now our pivot has been very much sift and listen well beyond the noise that's happening in our industry, try to find and start researching what's going to work well for not only restoring the faith, trust, and confidence, but then also what's going to really sustain us as an industry going forward. Heaven forbid this ever happens again.
Okay, very good. And what has been the role of technology in helping you to meet these challenges? What technologies have you thought about or have you tried in the past few months?
Sure, like anything, it's an immediate leverage what we have. So all of our monitor displays, of course, are communicating the latest and greatest as far as the responsibilities of the CDC and the recommendations of WHO, and certainly adjusting to those expectations, making sure that we are communicating effectively to our customer, and letting them know what they can anticipate when they show up. So we're pushing our social media agenda as well. Critical behind the scenes is more along the lines of, yes, we're engaged in the temperature checks. We have not actually officially deployed a required temperature check because we see ourselves as the airport being very effective in this initial research role, really trying to help our partner airlines and organizations like the TSA and Customs and Border Protection on what does this temperature check process mean. And it's not just as simple as checking temperatures, and as I suspect and hope that many are realizing. It's very much about a secondary check and a secondary process. We're using thermography. It's actually a new technology that just hit the market. So within about a few short 4 months, we've actually seen product concept to product development through phasing labs. So we're really excited to what this technology could potentially bring. The key to this technology specifically is that it has an AI component to it. So as phasing expands, we can start networking these camera technologies to identify where are their hotspots, not necessarily in airports, but also other public venues. And subsequently, if we start seeing that there is a potential outbreak in one particular community, does it give us an opportunity as an industry to shrink or limit the amount of activity coming from that area versus shutting down an entire industry? So we really have to start thinking ahead of what are we going to do if this should ever strike again. So the capabilities are well beyond what we typically would have expected, but absolutely pivoting very quickly to find those solutions.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Yes, we have seen lots of startups popping up trying to help automate the temperature taking process, and your take on using a networked process and using AI to figure out where the problem is starting and where it's going and how it's propagating, I think is a very good idea. Thomas, I thought we can perhaps talk about the same thing. So how have customer expectations changed for you? How has demand changed for you since the beginning of this year versus last year? And how is your day-to-day different?
Thank you, Farzin. So when Gunnar earlier presented what Icelandair is going through and how they've done that, I went check, 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 check. It's more or less a similar experience. So we think we're going through basically 3 phases in this thing, right? Phase 1 was everything shuts down and we have to find a way to still get stuff to the other end of the world. And I don't really have much to add to what Ashok and Gunnar described earlier. It's a perfect description of what we went through in March, April, May, also as an airline. Phase 2 is now sort of trying to figure out how we come back to sort of how we restart from this low point. We also had at the lowest point 3% of our capacity in the air or something like that. And we're sort of starting up, we're now at 15-20%, and we're trying to figure out how do we make this all work and how do we still accommodate our customers' needs, because industry hasn't shut down to that degree, but the transportation needs are still there. So that becomes a matching game, and their technology actually does help us. We luckily introduced algorithms to match capacity and pricing on a spot level back in November, and that has actually exploded through this crisis in terms of usage. So that has helped us. And then phase 3 at some point will be a new normal where I'm sure some of the learnings we make right now are going to stay with us.
And you mentioned the new pricing tool and the new customer engagement tool. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that became handy in this situation?
To say it simply, I mean, everybody, I think, in the air freight industry is familiar with the so-called spot quote, which is a price for just one particular shipment to go from A to B, as opposed to longer-term agreements. And traditionally, those are done manually. So someone sends an email or sends a structured request, etc. Manual reactions get very difficult when everything is in constant state of chaos, right? And so, as it was for 3 or 4 months of this year. And so we launched an engine basically where you can go to our website and get those prices in an automated way instantly. And when it was hard for us to react to all the different changes, that really helped us out, and a lot of our customers took advantage of that part to make sure to get their bookings and go.
And how has adoption changed over the past few months?
We, I don't think I should disclose the actual number, but let's just say the goal that we had set for 2024, we reached in May.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In terms of adaptation.
Okay. Very good. Very good. So it's good that you launched that new product. Yes, absolutely. David, good morning. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Very good. And so David, since you're the one working on the new shiny object, the autonomous vehicle, what do you think about where we are at, and what is the role of autonomous flight in a situation like this?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Well, first, just a brief about what we're doing. We're building autonomous aerial cargo systems for middle mile logistics. So think of it like delivery drones, but more like the size of a Cessna. So we're developing a system for 300 pounds of cargo and a 300-mile range. So point to point, that's about the distance from the Bay Area to Los Angeles. But the majority of our deployments will be a kind of hub and spoke, where we've got a 150-mile radius around a distribution center, around an airport, around a base that our military partners would be setting up. And so we're not in operations yet. We're building for the future of middle mile logistics to make it more nimble and more responsive. Looking at the data, what I've seen is continued strong demand for logistics, even through COVID, through the pandemic. That example of DB Schenker and Iceland Air is such a great example of innovating with the tools that we have today. We're really inspired by that. We're developing autonomous logistics systems, which there's some really good, the kind of early data right now that they're going to be important, not just to kind of raise the level of responsiveness of express logistics overall, but in a pandemic situation where you've got to do, keep people away from each other, distancing, contactless delivery, automated logistics where you can keep people away from each other makes even more sense. So hopefully this doesn't become the new normal, but in a pandemic situation, you can already see some of the last mile delivery startups, for instance, Starship Technologies doing ground last mile delivery, some of the smaller delivery drone companies that are already in operations. This kind of a situation validates that model even more so.
We look forward to having these fly around sometime soon. And Brian, speaking of autonomous systems at the airport, not just the ones that fly, but the ones that work inside the terminal, work at the warehouse, the airside vehicles that could be autonomous. What's your take on this, and what are the type of things that you're thinking about trying this year or next?
Sure, it's an absolute must with autonomy. We saw this coming, and absolutely before COVID struck, we joined a partnership with Adaptions, which is a large autonomous floor scrubber for hard surface tile. We have a tremendous amount of terrazzo at CVG. So we took the opportunity to join hands with Adaptions and launch their product, and exceptionally pleased. This was actually the second time that we trialed, tested, and subsequently launched. Our first partner did not live up to expectations. Very disappointing. So it was very much about not only can you commit to capabilities, but can you deliver on the capabilities? So it's that whole kind of cacophony around an industry excitement on autonomy. And sure enough, we found a fantastic partner in Adaptions. So we launched that, and initially the intent was really, because of the extensive floor care requirements, it's typically something that was done in the evening and blocking off large sections. Absolutely, did it help staff? Yes, and that was the intent. But with COVID, it's a twofold really kind of step. Number one, it absolutely can provide disinfection capabilities. So we're leveraging that aspect. The other aspect is that can't be missed is really it's the optics for the traveler. So as they're coming into the space, it's not uncommon for them to see this one particular device in use quite frequently. And what does that hold? It's really that trust and confidence. It's that immediate expectation and sign to the consumer that we are concerned about health and safety and very much forward looking in how can we keep this activation going for the long term. So then in turn, that keeps us motivated and stimulated to move forward in what about UV lighting? Probably not in floor care because UV lighting really needs to stay stationary for a period of time to be very highly effective. We have to think hospitals. So I see airports becoming perhaps more hospital-like in our cleanliness and disinfection capabilities. But then also really that kind of transaction capability with the consumer. What about the individual that doesn't necessarily want to venture around anymore? So we stand the risk of losing shopping and dining revenues. So we very much have to launch into robotics and frankly deliver those services right to their gate, cashless payment process, where they can have that kind of last minute buy or that overall experience that, again, someone is catering to my needs, recognizes that I have an opportunity, and I complete that transaction in a very safe and secure manner.
It's great that it's helping you both in terms of doing the job as well as a visual communicator that you are caring about them.
Completely.
That's great, yes. Thomas, switching a bit technologies, you talked about the role of the new pricing engine and the adaption, the great adaption that you have seen. How do you see in general the marketplaces that are available these days, the ones that help with all 3PL solutions as well as the ones that focus more on air cargo, the ones that are publicly available and the ones that are perhaps more focused on one segment of the industry or one certain career? What's your take on them and the adoption there?
Yeah, it's a differentiated view, I would say. So what the customer ultimately wants is one place to go to arrange all transportation needs, right? And there are various approaches to that question, from Flexport to fleets to all kinds of other platforms or digital forwarders or whatever you want to call it. I think that adoption rate is going to go very, very quickly. On the back end, these services often still act relatively traditionally because there is no good adaptation rate in terms of, for example, in our industry now, air freight transactions. So when I was very enthusiastic about the adaptation rate of our internal engine, so to speak, these indirect sales channels, as we call them, we cooperate with as many of them as we can find, but the actual number of bookings coming through them is relatively limited. And I think that's a function of not a lot of inventory being available there at the end of the day. So I think we still need a few years for this to shake out and for 2 or 3 dominant players to emerge to really get the necessary scale, essentially. Okay. Eventually, it's all going to go there. I mean, that's our conviction.
So scale is key and nobody has the critical mass yet.
Not in our part of the industry yet.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. David, regarding innovations that not you're doing, but you would like to see others do, what are some of the things that you would like to see in terms of infrastructure changes, whether it's at the airport or air traffic control or anything else there that could change, could innovate to help with your innovation that you're bringing to the market? What would you like to see happen out there?
Sure. Well, we're already standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of the enabling technology that makes the system that we are building, our aircraft system, possible. For instance, the electric and hybrid electric powertrain, modern simulation tools allow us to prove out performance of the aircraft long before we build it. And then some of the efforts that are now happening to define more scalable airspace access for drones. And so I guess I'll point to the last piece there, that the FAA is moving at a pretty rapid pace compared to historical changes in the industry to define how new aircraft, particularly autonomous aircraft, will operate and share the airspace with the aircraft currently operating today. So they play a super important role, both in terms of finalizing how airspace integration will work for a whole range of new and autonomous aircraft, and also how certification should work for these new aircraft that don't correspond, apples to apples to existing forms of aircraft that have been certified in the past. So for instance, our aircraft is what's called a lift plus cruise vertical takeoff and landing VTOL aircraft. And so it's got a hybrid electric powertrain, 8 rotors for vertical flight to take it straight up, straight down during takeoff and landing, and then forward flight also driven by electric powertrain. It's not a configuration that has been certified yet today. It will need to be, and so we're working very closely with the FAA to define that path to integration and certification of the vehicle. The other interesting thing I'll point out is that NASA also is playing a part in this new era of drone delivery and defining, particularly relevant to us, how these larger UAS, unmanned aerial systems will access the airspace. So just, a data point, General Atomics flew an aircraft called the Sky Guardian from Palmdale, California to Yuma, Arizona recently this year. And NASA has a goal to help accelerate routine UAS integration into the national airspace and help commercial UAS move closer towards certification. So I think that's the biggest enabler for us now. The technology is all in place to build the system we need to build. And the final hurdle is just defining the details of that airspace integration so that this aircraft that we're building, and other companies will be trying to build similar things, that we can really create these kind of automated conveyor belts through the sky for middle mile logistics that that can operate at a very high utilization, long number of service hours per day. And so I think there's the regulatory piece, and then what airports can do is to talk to their customers about their logistics customers about what kind of nearby routes, like what's in that 150-mile radius that goes by truck today once the jumbo jet offloads, that actually needs a faster option and needs could really benefit from a direct 100-mile-per-hour air cargo route out to, from point A being the airport, out to point B being a distribution center, a warehouse, or even a commercial customer that does a lot of logistics back and forth.
Very good. And Brian, switching gears a bit and looking more forward, what do you think folks should be doing in general and specifically around air cargo and infrastructure to be ready for the next surprise, the next emergency, the next disruption, the next pandemic? And what would be the role of technology in that preparation?
Yeah, completely. And I was looking down because I'm taking feverish notes with David's comments. So I could not.
You're getting ready as quick as you can.
I may have already reached out to him. So go Elroy.
Wow. Okay. We've got a pilot before the end of the panel. That's great.
I think. I can only hope. David's playing the poker face completely. No, David's spot on. So we have to, as airports, we very much have to look at the infrastructure that's ahead of us. It is no secret that airport infrastructure is woefully falling behind, especially in the US by comparison to our fellow airports around the globe. Oddly and ironically enough, COVID might actually put a dent in the pace outside the US, but we don't want that to happen. We absolutely have to continue to leverage aviation as really the innovative forefront. And disappointingly, we've kind of fallen behind. It's companies like David's that absolutely are pushing that envelope hard and fast, but it's really being held up to some extent by regulatory agencies. So what are we going to do differently to really accelerate this progress, recognize this unique opportunity, and it's sad that we have to say that, but recognize that the pandemic has really kind of pushed a scenario that we never could have fathomed, but it happened, and it can happen again, clearly. We've talked about pandemics for decades in our industry. Never did we ever imagine that it would happen to this extent. So here it is. From that perspective, then what are we going to do differently? It is embracing autonomous vehicles. It is embracing absolutely autonomous flying UAS, and it's looking to NASA to really accelerate that support for the FAA to really make sure that when David's ready to go, that we have piloted that program, we have secured the certifications, and we are launching very quickly. That description that David provided, Cincinnati is absolutely in, where it's actually cheaper and more cost effective and efficient for one of our partner carriers to fly the product into Cincinnati and truck it to one of those mega cities, shall we say. So from that perspective, think about the traffic that's on the roadways. Think about the semis and the pollutants, and then versus David's electric air vehicle. So there's a tremendous amount of positivity that can be gained by embracing these opportunities and run as fast as we possibly can, but safely.
Safety should be number one, I think. I don't want something not certified fly above my house. So speaking of pilots, to you, David, and maybe everybody can chime in, what does the ideal pilot look like for you? Obviously, yours is a solution that can't be tried and tested by yourself easily. And so perhaps I take it that you need partners, and especially maybe more than one or two. So can you give a picture of that and how folks who are around the table here and who are tuning in can perhaps be the partners in this journey with you?
Sure. So we are developing a system that is mostly autonomous, but it's going to need piloting. And the reason is there's a kind of, to use FAA terminology, there's kind of a crawl, walk, run approach to full autonomy, full deployment. And so for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a remote pilot who is sitting, maintaining the flight, watching the flight, not flying directly. Like, this is not a kind of joystick, stick to surface remote piloting scenario. The aircraft will fly itself, but the remote pilot is going to be there to respond to off-nominal conditions, respond when a decision needs to be made. Like, the autonomy system has sensed another aircraft that shouldn't be there based on flight plans and scheduling. What do you want me to do? Like, it can wait. It can, see if the situation resolves and keep going, or the remote pilot can decide, okay, bring it back. So I think there will certainly be an opportunity for remote pilots who have been GA pilots to enter this industry, to be remote pilots for UAS. You see that already out in the industry. You see it in the military. And so that's going to be the foreseeable future. We will still need pilots. Over time, what happens in our system is we just allow each pilot to monitor a larger and larger fleet of systems. And so as the autonomy that we're developing is permitted by regulatory bodies to operate more and more places with less human supervision, as we show a track record, it will just amplify how many systems the remote pilot can operate.
Very good. And in terms of partners, do you need somebody to bring the demand to you, the infrastructure?
Oh yeah, good question. Yeah, so we do. We are, we have a flexible model still right now. We have some future customers that we're working with that want to own and operate our systems themselves. We have others that want us to operate for them as a service. So as an earlier stage platform and technology company, we're fielding both kinds of requests, and so we're open to both models. But yes, logistics companies that have volume, that know they need higher performing options to get cargo from A to B, definitely would like to talk to anyone representing that. And then also, like I said, we're open to selling our systems to other operators. So cargo companies that already do air cargo that want new options in their fleet for doing middle mile in a very high performing way, open to those discussions too.
Very good. Excellent. Anything to add, Brian or Thomas, in terms of interest in doing something like that? Collaboration?
And Brian already got his pilot started, right? So
Great. Excellent.
we have, I think this is very, very interesting solution in a high-speed logistics environment, and we do have subsidiaries or one particular subsidiary that deals with that. I think that's where that should get started, where it really, as David said, a matter of hours make a difference.
Very good. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid that we are out of time. And so with that, thank you very much for joining me this morning again. And I hope everybody benefited from this discussion. Back to you, Frederick.
Thank you, Farzin, and thank you to our panelists again. Maybe one final question, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, could you just maybe leave your contact information below, or just say quickly what your preferred way of communication is before we let you go?
David?
Oh, I can be reached just at dave@elroyair.com. And if you don't have that on hand, there's also a contact form on our website, elroyair.com.
And I can be found on LinkedIn. That's actually the easiest.
Perfect.
Same is true for me. LinkedIn is the easiest.
LinkedIn works for me too.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Also, thank you to everybody who tuned in today. As always, we appreciate you taking the time. And then if you enjoyed this webinar, please come to one of our next ones. We hope to see you, for instance, at the upcoming collaboration with the World Bank, which is focusing on South Korean entrepreneurs innovating the agri-food supply chain, which is happening later this week. All other events can be found on our website, pnptc.com/events. And with that, stay healthy, goodbye, and see you next time.